I was sitting on a flight from Perth to Melbourne, and as I was sitting in the plane and I was taking some notes, and I'd just come from a seminar in Perth, which is the equivalent of flying from LA to New York. And I was there on the plane, and I was watching a television show with an interviewer called Andrew Denton. This Australian interviewer, this guy Andrew Denton, has a television show called Enough Rope, and he was interviewing an American guy called Lee Stringer. Now, Lee Stringer was a crack addict. In fact, you can Google Lee Stringer. He was a crack addict. He lived under Grand Central Station, homeless in New York City for 10 years. He got clean and went on to write a best-selling book. And he came over to Australia to promote the book, and he was on this television show. Andrew Denton asked him a question. I was sort of half paying attention, half having a glass of wine, half relaxing, when all of a sudden Andrew Denton asked this question that perked my curiosity. He said, "Let me ask you something, Lee. If you could go back to the 18-year-old self and give yourself advice, what advice would you give yourself?" And I sort of perked up. He said, "I know what you're doing, Andrew." He said, "You want me to go back to my 18-year-old self." He said, "And you want me to take in the chain of my life, you want me to take a couple of those links out." He said, "I won't do that." He said, "I won't do that because every link on that chain has led me to here." He said, "So you want to know the advice I give myself when I was 18? I'll give that to you." He said, "If I went to the 18-year-old self, very simple. 3 words, just keep going." I thought about that, and my curiosity, because an addict, if you've worked with an addict, when does an addict have to get through? The next 6 weeks? When? Today. Just keep going. I started to think, what if the answer to that question is how we act every day? So actually, there was this managing director up in Sydney, very successful guy. I said, he looks like Marlon Brando. I said, if you could go back and give yourself advice at 18 years old, what advice would you give yourself? He looked at me and said, "Chris, well, he said, I think, I think life's a fight. You know that. So you got to be prepared every day to battle." So the advice I give myself, 18, I'd say, you better come prepared to fight every day. I started to think about, guess what? That's how he goes through every day. And the advice you give yourself determines the behavior that you do. I found somebody's jumping up and down, they sort of bounce like this, you know, those people just bounce. I said, "Hey, if you could give yourself advice at 18, what advice would you give yourself?" And they go, "I don't know, probably take myself less seriously, I guess." I started to think about this from a salesperson's perspective. I said, if you could go back to your first day as a salesperson, what advice would you give yourself? And it was amazing, the answers people gave me. Some people said, you got to look after number one, because I'll tell you what, everyone's here to cut your lunch. And guess what? Those people had chips. Other people, I'd say, they would give me different answers. They'd say, listen, I used to get worked up about things, but the road is long. The race at the end of the day is with yourself. And guess what? They're totally going through things differently. I go to managers. I said, go back to your first day as a manager. What advice would you give yourself? And I had managers say to me, you know what? I get burned by people all the time, especially Generation Y. He said, you got to get out of people what you can. Use them up. Get out of what you can, because they're going to leave you anyway. Guess what this guy had? A retention problem. I started to think, I asked people about their wedding. Because you know there's that moment for guys where they got their tuxedo and they look in the mirror and they go, you know, everybody's, and there's that moment right there, you're dressed and your father leaves and you're there and you're going, oh, God, is this, and that moment, well, if you could go back to that moment, and tap yourself on the shoulder, what advice would you give yourself? For some people, they go, pss, pss, hey, listen, he's a good guy and it's all going to work out. You know what? Have fun today. Have fun today, because it goes like that and it's gone. It's all going to work out. Enjoy today. Is it possible some other people tap themselves on the shoulder and go, psst, hey, the car's running, let's go. And guess what? If that's the answer to the question, the truth is, while funny, the reality of it is, that's how they're going through the marriage. The truth is in the advice we give ourselves. I imagine the first time you picked up a child. I think back to the first time I picked up Jake. And if I went back to that moment where you picked up that slippery little sucker for the first time, and you could tap yourself on the shoulder, let me ask you, if you could say, hey, listen, I know you got no idea what you're doing. It's all going to work out. Just enjoy the ride. I imagine you're a pretty good parent. Our behavior is determined by the advice we'd give ourselves. It only stands to reason if we want to change. We want to change the behavior, we can change the advice.
Chris Elder.